Hey guys, happy Independence Day. This is an Independence Day message from your mama. And I don't know actually if anybody ever watches the videos that I'm making for you guys or any of the stuff that I share, but it's really not my responsibility to make anybody watch anything. I'm just putting it out there. And if you watch it, that's great. And open for dialogue on anything that you think about what I'm saying or what I'm sharing. But if you don't, that's okay. And I'm just putting it out there. It's just like doing the right thing. You do the right thing whether people notice or not, whether you get recognition or not. It doesn't matter. You did the right thing. That's all that matters. And maybe someday my grandchildren will watch it, or my great-grandchildren, or somebody will get touched by it. So I'm not really like looking for how many people have watched it. I'm just putting it out there. The reason that I'm giving this message is because we just watched a movie that Dinesh D'Souza did. It got thumbs up from everybody in the household, every age that we have here, and it's gotten great reviews. And it was written in 2016. It was put out, and before the election, and it's titled America. I actually forgot the name of the movie, but it was basically America, What Would the World Be Like Without, Imagine the World Without Her. I think that's what it's called. So what he does in there is he interviews people, and he states and there's also dramatics in there to keep you entertained, but the criticisms of America. Okay, so basically Columbus came and we destroyed the beautiful, peaceful Indian culture. And the next one was the slavery, how we enslaved people, and the Africans. And the next one was going out west, and Mexico, how we took lands from Mexico. And the fourth one was how we are what's the word, using the workers, how the entrepreneurs and the business people are abusing the workers by not giving their fair share. So what he does after that is he goes through and he explains a history that actually, to be honest, I hadn't even heard. There are people in this documentary that none of us have ever heard of before. And also concepts that really, really make it clear what actually happened and what is actually going on now. So I am not thinking that you guys are going to watch that documentary, but if you do, it's definitely worth your time. I highly recommend it. But I'm going to go ahead and give you some points that are in it. Spoiler alert, if you are going to watch it, don't listen to the rest of this video, because you just should hear it for yourself from the video. Okay, so I'm giving you a chance to shut this off and then go watch the movie. But if you're not going to do that, then I will tell you some of the points of it. Okay. So there was a black man named Frederick Douglass during the time of Abraham Lincoln, and he was, a liberator of the black people, and he actually was a friend of Abraham Lincoln, and he and Abraham Lincoln worked together, and they did things together. We didn't know that. Okay, so they were actually friends. Howard Zinn is a revolutionary historian. He wrote a book that a lot of people have read on the history of America. He actually is a revolutionary. There is a historian named Ron Radesh, who is a contemporary of his, who says he is actually distorting facts to fit his narrative, to fit the narrative of the revolution. He actually is not being truthful about the history of America in his book. So Howard Zinn is being criticized as not being truthful about his history. So the reason I say that is because he wrote a book, and I forgot to write down the title of the book, but it's American History, basically, that is being taught in schools and promoted by the media and the elites and all of them. So he said, so who does give a more accurate accounting of American history? There was a French aristocrat named Alexis de Tocqueville who journeyed through America when it was new, and he wrote a book called Democracy in America in 1831, and he wrote about how unique the situation was in America because everybody was their own person. Like, they were not subject to anybody else. Everybody had the opportunity to be industrious and entrepreneur and creative. And he said it was the people took care of each other better than any governmental institution ever could. He also found that the religion was their first politic, that they had a very, very strong faith. So one thing to think about when you're thinking about back in the time of Columbus, I will back up now and I'll go back to the time of Columbus. Just keep in mind that, first of all, a lot of the stories that you hear aren't in context and they aren't necessarily all true. But obviously some of it was. And just to keep in mind that this was 150 years before the colonists came, and that back in those days, conquest is how it was done. That's how everybody did it. In Europe, Britain was conquered by the Romans, and then it was conquered by the Normans before it was Britain. In India, they were conquered by Alexander the Great, and then the Arabs, and then the Afghans, and then the Mongols, and then the Persians, and now they're India. But basically, every country was founded by being conquered. That was the way that it was done. America was the first place where wealth was not created from looting. Wealth is created by creation, entrepreneurship, and trade. That is an American idea. That was a novel idea. In India, they have the caste system. An entrepreneur is one step up from the bottom. Looting is preferable because it's considered more manly, and you beat the other person in open combat to take his stuff. That is how it was viewed, survival of the fittest, like the strongest took the most. America is the first country that did it differently. So let's see, what's the next point? Columbus was 150 years before America. Treaties. Okay, so let's go to the Indians. The treaties that we made with the Indians. And by the way, the Indian tribes all fought with each other, and they conquered each other's lands too. Like tribes would be at war with each other. And we all know the story of the Aztecs, how they brutally, sacrificed and tortured and murdered and enslaved the other tribes that they conquered. So anyway, the idea of a treaty, that's also new. that departed from the conquest ethic. So the fact that we didn't do it perfectly wasn't good. You know, it wasn't good. The trail of tears and the things that happened were not good. But we have gone back and tried to rectify it. And in fact, in South Dakota and the Black Hills, we did make restitution. It's called, because we recognized in the courts that the Laramie Treaty of 1868 was not honored. And so we have $1 billion, which is the value of the land that's being, that was in the treaty, is set aside. And they don't want it. They want the land back. They don't want the money, but it's there. We're offering restitution for that. Before the tribe that's there now, and once again, it was going so fast, I didn't write down the name of the tribe that's there now, but I did catch that before they were there, there was the Cheyenne, the Kiowa, and the Arapaho. So through the conquer ethic, they all conquered each other and took over those lands until the ones that are there were there when the Europeans came. And we're offering them $1 billion for that land. The thing is that if they wanted to go back to their lifestyle and the way that they lived back then, they could do that, but they choose not to. Instead, they choose to open resorts and casinos and other entrepreneurial businesses and function through creativity, entrepreneurship, and trade, which is the American idea. So, you know, they could help their own people. So after Columbus, 80% of the people died, and which was tragic, terribly tragic, but it was not a genocide. It was because they didn't have immunity to the measles, the typhus, the cholera, and the smallpox that the Europeans brought over here. And the same token, before a certain period of time before that, the Europeans died of the bubonic plague, which came from Asia, because they didn't have immunity to that either. Half of Europe was wiped out because of the bubonic plague, but we don't call that a genocide because it wasn't intentional. It wasn't like people said, oh, we're gonna bring the bubonic plague over. The Asians didn't say that, say we're gonna wipe out Europe. And the Europeans didn't come over here and say we're gonna wipe out the Native Americans with these, you know, diseases that they have no immunity to. It was not intended. It was unfortunate. So that's really not fair to call that a genocide. So Texas, let's talk about Texas. So what happened was Texas was under the governorship of Mexico, and General Santa Anna, who was in charge of Mexico at the time, stripped the rights of Texans and was abusing and taking advantage of Texans. So the Texans decided to fight for the land and for their freedom from Mexican rule. So they fought a revolution with the assistance of the Union soldiers who had just won the Civil War, and they won their freedom from Mexico. They actually occupied Mexico City. They took over the entire thing, not just Texas, Mexico, and Texas, and Arizona, and California, and New Mexico, and what they call the occupied territories now. The Americans occupied all of it. And what happened was they owed a debt to Mexico. And so instead of just saying, screw your debt, we own you now, we said, okay, we're gonna cancel out that debt, and we're gonna give you the land in payment for the debt that we owe you. So the land that is now called Mexico was actually given back after it was conquered to pay back a debt that they owed. On top of that, they interviewed a border patrol person who said he has never in his 26 years of being a border patrol agent seen one American or Mexican ever try to cross the border back into Mexico illegally. But he's seen thousands of Mexicans trying to get into this country. So I wonder how many Mexicans wish that we would have just kept that land. Something to think about. So in this country, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is novel. It's brand new. We're the only country that has that in our Constitution. There were, when you want to talk about slavery, there were 3,000 soldiers who died fighting for the freedom of slaves. And remember that slavery was all over the world. Every country had slaves. But we're the only country that actually fought a bloody war to end it. Think about that. The founding principles of the Declaration of Independence made civil rights victory possible in 1964. Made the Civil War possible, made the victory of the Civil War and the victory of the Civil Rights Movement. Also, this was fascinating to me. Starting in 1618, white indentured servants were captured, not just tricked into coming. They were captured, kidnapped from England. 150,000, over 150 years, 150,000 people were captured and forcibly brought here from Ireland. Their indentured time was 7 years. It was often extended, or the people would die before it ended. Very few got freedom. They worked side by side with the slaves, and for many years they outnumbered slaves. In South Carolina was the most feared slave owner ever. He was also a slave breeder, which was looked down upon by other slave owners. It was not a reputable practice. His name was William Ellison. He was black. He was born into slavery. He was freed. He became a blacksmith. Then he became a mechanic of cotton gins. Then he worked his way into land ownership, and he ended up owning 1,000 acres, and he owned 60 slaves. And believe it or not, he wasn't the only one. There were 3,500 free blacks that owned more than 10,000 slaves. Some states had just as many black slave owners as white slave owners. That is left out of the history books. There was a woman who none of us heard of. Her name is Sarah Breedlove. Her more famous name is Madam Walker. She was the first freeborn black woman, black person, she's black, of her family. She was orphaned at the age of 7. She got married at the age of 14. She was a single mother, widowed at the age of 20. She started working in the cotton fields, then she worked her way to the wash tub, and she worked her way to the kitchen. And she started selling hair care products door to door. She became so successful that she became the first self-made female millionaire in this country. Not black female millionaire, not the first self-made female millionaire. This is what she had to say. You don't have to define yourself by current station, but by your vision of yourself. You have to be willing to work hard, and don't be haughty. Be willing to do whatever needs to be done. So if we were so racist and so backwards, then why did we fight a bloody civil war to end slavery? And how in the world did the first female millionaire, how is it that she was black? So basically the way that they look at it, the way that America looks at all of us is everybody in this country is a minority of one. And how we succeed or fail depends on our own efforts. That is a brand new concept in the world. There's more here. There was John Furr, who was a pilot, POW of 6 years. He was in the Vietnam War. They tortured him terribly, but he got freed after the war was over. And he was asked, why do you think we were there? And he said, I believed that we were helping South Vietnam to be free to determine their own destiny. That is why we go to these wars. If we did these wars to conquer these places, we would have conquered them. Vietnam would be part of America, but it's not. Iraq, we spent a lot of money over in Iraq. We don't have their oil. We don't use their oil. We gave it back. Afghanistan, while we were fighting in Afghanistan, we actually were dropping food rations to the civilians there. We actually spent a lot of money, effort, time, and resources, more than anybody else, to rebuild Germany and Japan after World War II. Our enemies. We helped them to rebuild. We could have taken them over. They could have been American territories, but that's not our way. That's not what we want. We want everybody to be free to determine their own way. That's not the story that we get. That is so much not the story that we get. Colin Powell said, the only land that we ask for abroad is the land to bury our dead. So then we go on to entrepreneur. We go on to the rich taking advantage of the poor, the entrepreneurs, the big business owners, small business owners taking advantage of the workers, not paying them enough, and so forth. So he broke down, Dinesh D'Souza did a funny little skit where he was like Delish D'Souza, and he owned a hamburger stand. And he said, okay, so here comes Susan. She orders a hamburger. It costs $1.95. So after he went through what costs for food, labor, rent, insurance, advertisement, all of that, he ends up with a 16 cents profit on that burger. And then he goes on to go to her house and say, okay, all of these things that she had to buy to make that burger, what they cost, you break it down, and into the individual servings to make that burger, it costs her $2.22 to make the burger. And that doesn't even factor in the time that she took to make it. And it costs $1.95 at the restaurant. So the point is that the workers are not being taken advantage of. The workers are getting paid what the fair market value is for their labor. Does it mean that no workers are ever taken advantage of? No, of course not. Humans are messy. Some people are very greedy. But for the most part, capitalism works. And it's the most fair way of having an economy. Basically, the people that have a lot of money, it's through the consent of the consumers. Apple would be nothing if people didn't buy it. Actors would be poor if people didn't watch their movies. Disney would go out of business if nobody went there. So it's only through the consent of the consumers that businesses thrive. Also, there's a claim that no business is an island on itself or whatever, and that it couldn't succeed without the services and the things that they get that us taxpayers pay for. But the thing is the people that own these big corporations and stuff, they pay on average about 4 times more taxes than the regular worker does, than middle class people. So do they get 4 times faster response time from the fire department? Do their kids get 4 times more attention in public school? Do they get to work 4 times faster on the roads? I mean, no. Everybody pays for it, and they pay more. So that's not really a fair thing to say. Also, they take all the risk. Workers, you get paid whether they make money or not. You're not going to go to work if they're not making money, but they still have to run their business even if they're not making money. So the other thing to keep in mind is that the world has embraced the free market ideals. The free market ideals that have been born in this country are spread all over the world. In India, 200 million people have been brought up out of poverty due to free market ideas. In China, 400 to 500 million people have been brought up out of poverty due to free market ideas. Capitalism and free enterprise ideas, even though they're communist, they have adopted some of the ideals, and they have helped their people to come up out of poverty using those. Arthur Brooks from the American Enterprise Institute debunked the idea that conservatives are stingy, that conservative Christians are stingy, and that the liberals are more generous, the secular left, because he has data to prove that the conservative Christians, the big business owners, and everybody on down the line give on average 4 times more than the people on the secular left to charity. So they believe in individual initiative, community, and faith. So I already wrote this, but for some reason it's here again. The conquest ethic is universal, the conquest ethic. The thing that's uniquely American is that truths are self-evident, equal rights, equal justice, rights, life, liberty, rights for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is a uniquely American ideal. So then he goes on to say, well, what's going on in the shaming of America? Basically, what's happening right now is that there's an effort to tear America down. And that's why we're being taught that America is bad. Because as Abraham Lincoln said in one of his famous speeches, all of the forces of the world could not destroy this country, could not even get into this country. The only thing that can destroy this country is us. And so we are being taught to hate this country, and we are being taught that we're bad, and we're being taught that it needs to go, and it needs a revolution. I'm not going to go into all the details because we're already at a half hour in. I'm not going to go into all the details that are in the movie. I really encourage you guys to watch the movie because the last part of the movie is explaining what's going on today. But I am going to say that we are in a crossroads. We do have a decision to make because our country is at stake. So the Revolutionary War was to create this country. The Civil War was to preserve this country. World War II was to protect this country. And now what we have before us is to restore this country. I hope that you got something out of this, and I love you all. I will always love you all. And just remember, in the end, we all know that God wins. And fear comes from the devil. So all we have to do is cling to the truth, seek the truth, have courage, ask God for help, be humble, love each other, be strong, and we will conquer the evil that's threatening to overtake our country. I love you guys.